Alright, welcome back to the channel, or welcome if you're new. So, there have been quite a few updates to the Tevesh Szat Rog deck, the Bull Szat deck, since the last video. And I do have those in a notepad, so I'm actually going to bring those up. I had to go back and review the video to get the list. The next thing I'm going to do after that is I'm going to talk about, I want to run you through a game rather, in which my expectation of how the rules should work did not actually match how the rules do work. And it does say it right on the card, but it's incredibly frustrating when that happens. It's kind of like, I'll give you an example of it later, but it is a loss for me, and I lost because of something that was preventable. So I figured, I'll show you that game so that hopefully that won't affect you. Most of you probably already know it, but it doesn't hurt to have the refresher anyway. And then finally I'll run through some games where I actually win, and if there's time I might play a couple live games or something. In the meantime, let's talk first quickly, hopefully quickly, let's talk about the changes. So there have been quite a few changes from the last video, and this is them. I'm pushing it with the lands. I want to see if I can get away with 30. Might go back to 31, but keep in mind, of course, we do have Shatter Skull Smashing, so this is actually technically one higher than what it looks like. And of course, we get to run Moxes and stuff that other decks can run, but not as effectively. So we have more zero drop mana sources than it actually looks like if you were just going off the 30 here. But in the meantime, there were a few changes. One, I took out Cabal Pit and just made it a swamp. I took out the basic swamp, snow swamp rather, and I took out the basic swamp, made it a snow swamp. The only reason I had the basic was because Tainted Pact is in here. I've cut that. Don't need it. Most of the time, if a mono black deck is going to run anything, if you face a mono black opponent and they have things that interact with snow lands, it's going to typically be something they have that's favorable. And because we can play cards off your opponent's library with Ragavan, we always want to play snow basics over regular basics. The same is true for our singular snow-covered mountain and our snow-covered swamps, because say you hit a red deck and you flip over like a Scred, you want to be able to, I think it's called Scred, it's the one red instant that deals damage based on snow permanence. You want to be able to get as much value out of it as you can in the situation where that might matter. So anytime you can run snow lands over basics, it's almost always going to be correct to do so. So two easy little swaps there. Finally, Smoldering Marsh, kind of an underperformer, despite having the increased basic land count. Card's frustrating and almost never, pretty close to never, honestly, came into play on tap for me. Of course, I could search it out on turn one and do nothing, but this is a deck that really wants to be doing things on turn one. Never super optimal, never super pleased to see it. Don't mind cutting it. Probably if we're going to go back to 31, I might just add yet another basic land. It provides a deck with some additional resiliency against Blood Moon too, which is interesting. Blood Moon should be a tool that we could run if we want to, but we do need to have enough basic lands for that to be true, as well as alternate mana sources, which we have. And we also want to make sure we're not weak to it, because otherwise we're just giving games away we shouldn't have to. So that's the idea behind this, and we're going to try and eke out a little less permanent mana in order to try to sneak in a little more fast mana. In this case, a sort of dark ritual that you put in the bank. The card that I'm testing in that slot, I actually took out Everflowing Chalice, which was in the last list as well, and put in Pentad Prism. So that card, it can allow you to play a turn 2 Tevesh Szat that you couldn't normally play. It can allow you to do a few different things that you couldn't normally do. We'll see if the card remains in the deck long term, but in the short term, the reasoning behind it is you can get a play like any Mox in a land, play a Pentad Prism, and next turn you have 5 mana Tevesh Szat. It also leaves a permanent into play, which matters for Mox Opal, it matters for the Ready, and it matters for another card that's been added into the deck, Smokestack. So it can matter in those cases. There's another small interaction you can get, like, for example, you can, even if you only had, let's say, Land Mana Crypt is your opener. So Land Mana Crypt, you can play Pentad Prism on 1. You can pay it for 2 mana, but as long as you spend the one black mana that you have to pay for the Prism, it'll actually only come into play with 1 charge on it. And in that case, it's pretty bad. But if you look at it in another way, on turn 2, you're still playing turn 2 Tevesh Szat. And so it's kind of like a delayed Dark Ritual, where you put the mana in now, you get it later. Dark Rituals spend 1 to get 3, and Prism, at its optimal use, is spend 0 to get 2. later, right? So that's why I say about a delayed dark ritual. Effectively, it's like a Cabal ritual that doesn't have the upside of triggering threshold. So that's kind of the thought process behind it. We'll see if it continues to make the cut, but it is an interesting card, and it certainly deserves some testing, and that could go back to being another land if it turns out we need just a little bit more. In the meantime, some of the other changes. So I took out the Marsh, I just put in Gorilla Shaman, basically, in that slot, and I changed the Chalice to the Prism. Gorilla Shaman right now seems, the more that I play cEDH, the more I realize it's dominated by 0 mana artifacts and 1 casting cost artifacts, and Gorilla Shaman thrives in an environment like that. He's not called Mox Monkey for no reason. It's also a way to get around negate effects, which blue runs quite a few of, and you can throw this in play, you can eat things. It also has some interesting synergy with a few other things. You can synergize it with Liquid Metal Torque, where you can, like, I actually have a game where I animate, I turn a Sylvan Library into an artifact and I eat it with Gorilla Shaman. You can, of course, clamp it. You can tap it for Springleaf Drum, so it's another way to just get a creature out. Maybe Rog's too expensive at that point in the game, whatever. And you can, of course, sacrifice it to Tevesh Szat. So it's not really going to ever be dead. It's not going to be, you don't just play generic 1/1s in a deck like this, which is what it might end up being. All those things I described would fit the bill for any 1/1. But the fact that it has this tremendous potential upside of slowing down a fast start and maybe even acting as a combo with Torque to shut off almost any permanent your opponent can play in the right situation, that's pretty good. Except keep in mind that it doesn't eat creatures, so you can't, like, you can eat a Sylvan, but you can't eat like a Dark Confidant, for example. All right, so that's one addition. Another was that I just took out Plunge into Darkness and Tainted Pact. This deck doesn't really want to. The problem with these cards is they're in imprecise tutor effects, and the deck really wants cheap precision tutoring. And the reason that you want cheap precision tutoring is because, being a tempo-oriented deck, you don't want to spend a lot of mana on tutoring. And if you're going to tutor, it really needs to have the impact that makes spending additional mana worth it. For example, if you Demonic Tutor for Soul Ring, right, a classic play, that's still a 3 mana Soul Ring, same as like a Worn Power Stone. That doesn't come into play tapped, so a little bit better, but still, it has to be good enough that it's worth it. And of course, most of the time, that kind of a play really is worth it. But my point is, when you add in the additional cost of tutoring, what if you're not getting Soul Ring though? What if you're just getting like your demonic tutor, your quote unquote demonic tutoring with like a Plunge or a Pact, and you're getting something that is more like a land drop? Or what if you're just hitting like I don't know, Springleaf Drum or something, because you can't afford to go too deep, or it's the best out of what you've seen, and it's good enough, right? So a lot of times that's what was happening with these cards. We're making our cards cost more mana to get a card that was, you know, good enough, because you don't want to kill yourself with a Pact or a Plunge. And good enough might not be good enough, and that's kind of why I switched them out. Winter Orb, yes, I know it's kind of a meme at this point in my channel. I love Winter Orb. The thing about it is I was finding that I didn't really have great ways to punish blue mages for aggressively disrupting me, and Winter Orb is the card you're looking for under those scenarios. It's not just blue mages though, it's green mages that ramp where artifact removal is not as effective. It's a lot of scenarios where basically either your opponent has a commander who, if it resolved, probably wins the game, or your opponent's actually managed to pull ahead. For example, maybe they stick a Necro on you, and you're like, without Winter Orb, a lot of cases, if your opponent sticks a Necro, just concede, because it's like, what the heck am I even supposed to do to slow them down? I just can't, right? Winter Orb changes that. It can allow you to potentially, at least, you know, choke their hand up with, sure, they have card advantage, but they don't have spell advantage. Like, they can't play the cards, so it reverses the card advantage that they should have and buys you the time to potentially solve the problem, or catch up, or equalize things with your own Necro, or whatever it is that you're going to be doing to make sure that that game works out in your favor. And there's really just no card like that. There's no other card that does that. And unfortunately, you'll see in the game that I'm going to demonstrate, in which I lose. Winter Orb was absolutely critical, very amazing. I actually was setting up a winning scenario, I thought, but again, it was a rules issue that kills me, not necessarily anything else, a misunderstanding on my part. But we'll get to that in a moment. The next thing was Tainted Pact for Smokestack. Smokestack is just, you kind of have to feel it out in the deck to understand how insane it is, but it's crazy in this deck. It's so good. It is a Vindicate, so it's a 3-mana Vindicate. It targets their best target. You know, they get to make the choice, but it's every turn, and it basically doesn't affect you at all, or dang near doesn't affect you at all. You have extra things you can throw into it, like the leftovers from a Pentad Prism, a tapped Mana Vault, or Grim Monolith. You can throw Rog into it, but you also have the scenario where you can get Tevesh out, and you can just feed this thing endlessly. You can tick it up a lot of times. In fact, I had a game where I ticked a Smokestack up to 3, and I had Tevesh though, and I was as fast as I could eating through as many of my opponent's permanents because they were way ahead. But we were in top decking wars, and I drew Smokestack, so I played it, and over the next couple turns, it was kind of like, you know, they would draw a threat, I would draw an answer, I would draw a threat, they would draw an answer, but the whole time Smokestack Tevesh was running, and I was losing eventually 1 permanent per turn for every 3 of my opponent, and that's just an insurmountable advantage. And eventually my opponent's board was gone. I let the Smokestack go, and in fact, I don't even know if I even let the Smokestack go, because 1 permanent per turn this deck can often just keep up with, and it's probably like something that it's not going to matter. And even a Smokestack on 3 is actually only 1 permanent per turn with Tevesh Szat. Just crazy, really good card. Of course, it deals with things that we normally can't or struggle to deal with, like enchantments and planeswalkers and stuff like that. So it's just an amazing card. It does play into the attack angle that your opponents are going to want to take against you, which is to attack your artifacts. So keep that in mind. But you know, some things can't be helped, and sometimes have an overwhelming number of targets can just mean that by the time the Smokestack comes down, they don't have any more disenchants readily available, and you can get a lot of value out of it before they find a solution to it. Also, there are insane hands like where you sometimes just slam down a Smokestack right off the bat and kind of just win the game. Like you, one thing I want to talk about as far as Smokestack, just in case you're not familiar with this trick, there are 2 triggered abilities that go on the stack at the beginning of your upkeep. So at the beginning of your upkeep, the 2 triggered abilities, and they go on in the order you choose. 1 is to sacrifice based on the number of soot counters. 2 is to add soot counters, or not add soot counters, but it's to make that decision. So the decision and of soot counters, and the decision to sacrifice. So soot and sack, right? When you start your turn, because both triggered abilities, the Smokestack doesn't specify what order to put them in. You choose the order that they go on the stack. Not the Smokestack, but the the Magic the Gathering spell stack, right? So what you'll do is what you do when you do it correctly is you want to put the soot counter on the bottom of the stack, which means you want to put it onto the stack first, and then you want to stack on top of that. You want to put the sack portion of the triggered ability of the ability, not triggered ability, but the I guess it is a triggered ability, triggered by the beginning of your upkeep. Anyway, so you want to put the sacrifice portion on the top. And so what ends up happening is, let's say a Smokestack has 0 counters, put the soot on the bottom, the sack on the top. So the sack will resolve first. It's going to come off the top of the stack, and you're going to sacrifice 0 counters, and then the soot will resolve, and you'll put a counter on it. So now your opponent sacrifices the first permanent. It swings back to your turn. You stack it the same way. When you resolve it, it has 1 counter, so you sacrifice a permanent, and you add a counter, and now on their turn, they're going to sack 2 permanents. So at this point in the game, they've sacrificed 3 permanents to your 1. Extremely good. Now, if you decide at that point you've had enough, and you want to let it go, you sack the stack and 1 other card, so you've lost 3 to 3. But one of them was the Smokestack. So you're a little bit better off than they were. That said, first of all, nothing makes you add soot counters. You don't have to. You probably are always going to add at least 1. But secondly, of course, you can time it to grow the sacrificial power of this card as appropriate. But also, like I said, you've got this really cheap thing that you can just throw in there, and you've got free tokens you can throw in there, and you've got lots of leftover stuff you can throw in there. For example, you can set it on 1 and have a Daretti running. So you can curve Daretti into Smokestack, set it on 1, and never lose anything. Just make a token, eat the token, make a token, eat the token. Right? So It's insane, which would turn Daretti into Vindicate every turn, which is just nuts, right? So incredibly powerful card, so that's another change that's occurred. Next, Praetor's Grasp came out, Fiery Confluence came back in. Praetor's Grasp is really good. I like it a lot. I think it's pretty amazing. But it's so important to have the Fiery Confluence effect that I just could not, I missed it badly when it was out. It's really important against green to have board sweepers for creatures, and it's really important against most players to have artifact sweepers, and this card does both. Plus, rarely, not often, but occasionally, dealing 6 to your opponent's face actually matters, and that's usually a game where they do like a giant ad nauseum and they calculate exactly what their life total needs to be, and then you just dome them for 6, and suddenly you could potentially end the game there. Grasp doesn't necessarily let you do that, and again, Grasp runs into the problem of the tutor issue, where you're spending mana to essentially demonic tutor. The card you get has to be great. So when you Praetor's Grasp for your opponent and you haven't played a land for the turn, you go get Strip Mine. That's pretty awesome, because now it's like a Stone Rain, which is solid sometimes and great and what you need. Other times, you go get their Mana Crypt. But there are also occasions where you grasp them and you go get, and another thing that you can get with grasp that's really cool is like a deflecting swat or a free counter spell, commander counter. Those are all the situations where it tends to shine. But there are also cases where you Praetor's Grasp them, and there's really, either because they've already drawn them or just the state of the game or whatever, there's really nothing particularly thrilling to get, and then the card feels really bad. On the other hand, when your opponent has targets for Fiery Confluence, particularly multiple artifacts, and you don't have a Fiery Confluence, you're like desperate. Please, I need artifact removal so bad, right? Or if they're flooding the board with goblins or elves or whatever, you're like, please, just give me a board sweeper. Because Fiery Confluence sits at that sweet spot where it does both, just don't quite think that this card can be cut. I think it has to come back in. You need that flexibility. There's a saying that there are no wrong threats, there are only wrong answers, and that is true. It's one of the reasons that aggro can be so good, aggressive disruption or aggressive life total attack. And basically what that saying is kind of trying to tell you is that while your opponent you might draw a Fiery Confluence, and no, I'm not going to use that card as an example. You might draw Vandal Blast, and your opponent's overrunning you with Priest of Titania and Land-Aurora Elves and Gaia's Cradle and stuff like that. You've drawn an answer to the wrong threat, right? And vice versa, you can draw your Toxic Deluge, and they've got Soul Ring and Crypt and all this stuff. You've drawn an answer to the wrong threat. So there's no wrong threats, only wrong answers, in terms of timing. Fiery Confluence does a much better job being modal, of not running into that problem as often. Of course, the casting cost being double red's a little awkward and stuff, but what are you going to do? With great power comes great mana cost often. Finally, there's, speaking of great mana cost, I did cut the Worn Power Stone. Originally, Worn Power Stone was in there for Everflowing Chalice. Like, we had Chalice and Power Stone, and then at some point I realized like it was too much. Cut the stone and just kept the Chalice, and then eventually cut the Chalice, as you can see. So the difference between the last video and now is that essentially neither one of them has made the cut long term. They could come back, but it feels like I was getting a little bit flooded a little too often. We had too much mana, and I needed a payout card, just like one more good payout card. And man, God Pharaoh's Statue is so good. So there are situations where you get your opponent down to, two lands in play, no cards in hand. You're like, I've got this game. And they draw and go Underworld Breach, and you look at their graveyard, and they're like Lion's Eye Diamond and the Blue Storm spell that puts cards in the graveyard, and you're like, wow, two mana in play, no cards in hand, and I'm literally dead here. This is miserable, right? God Pharaoh's Statue stops all that BS. It stops all the ritual time twister, Wheel of Fortune, blah 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 blah, storm you, right? It shuts all that stuff down. It makes it really hard for your opponent to counterspell. It makes it hard for them to play the game. It means that they can typically play one spell per turn, but they typically cannot play two. So it's almost like putting your opponent under it's like what is that card? Arcane Lab, I think it is, where you can only play one spell per turn. But it's like putting them under that and not you, which is fantastic. And the fact that it's an artifact is great for us because, of course, we have a lot of colorless mana sources to include Mishra's Workshop, so you can get this thing down really quick sometimes. You can even, quote-unquote, turn one kill the typical deck. you can sometimes just, through a combination of rituals and fast mana, just slam this thing on turn one and be like, all right, your turn. And now you literally time walk them, because the very first thing they can do is play a 0-drop on turn two. 1-0-drop, right? So it's so devastating of a card to get into play. It is expensive. It does make Ad Nauseam a little worse having these extra 4s and the 6. That is something to keep in mind. The average CMC is up a bit, and also replacing lands with spells always raises CMC as well. So keep that in mind when you nauseam. But we don't typically Ad Nauseam for trying to Ad Naus to kill an opponent. We typically Ad Naus for value anyway. So dropping down to 15-ish or so is usually where you want to be with that card. I've gone as low as 6, but it's not fun because we have so many cards that use life total as a resource. So you want to stay in the teens, definitely, if you can help it when you nauseam. But at any rate, Godpharaoh statue, even if you hit it, yeah, it's going to hurt off an Ad Nauseam, but if you're playing AN, you're probably winning anyway. And if you do it into a statue that you then deploy, like say you Ad Nauseam their turn and deploy statue, you're probably winning that game anyway too, so the 6 life is worth it in general. Card's really awesome, and it creates just another lock scenario where your opponent just can't play the game. And in cEDH, believe me, you don't want them playing the game. The problem with cEDH is when your opponent plays. And so we want as many things to prevent that from happening as possible. There were some other cards I looked at, like Nether Void, and looked into some other options as well. I was trying out like Wildfire and a lot of different ideas. But what I like most about Winter Orb, Smokestack, and Godpharaoh Statue, which are the 3 stacks-like pieces, literally Smokestack is where stacks term came from, the 3 stacks pieces, aka lock your opponent out from the ability to play the game cards. What I like about those is that they're mostly one-sided, even though like Godpharaoh Statue is all one-sided. Smokestack is one-sided, and once you use it correctly, it feels very one-sided. And Winter Orb, of course, with this many artifacts and all this artifact kill and disruption, feels very one-sided as well. And that's the kind of thing we want to be doing here. This is not a friendly cash game of Magic that we're sitting down to play. We're sitting down to win as decisively and brutally as possible. But more importantly, brutality aside, the main thing is what I really mean is as mercilessly as possible, right? So brutally, no, I don't. You don't need to kill all the artifacts and get like the ultimate victory of like, I don't know, death clouding everything, and you can do it. But what I'm saying is mercilessly, in the sense that we're going to play every feels bad card under the sun if that card is the right card for the slot and advances our game plan of winning, and that's it. So with that in mind, unfortunately, I'm going to run through this. I'll run through the winning games last. I'm going to run through this losing game. I'm going to show you how I lost, because this is super important, and hopefully nobody else makes this mistake maybe as a result of this video. I'm sure you, as I said, most of you already know not to make this mistake, but I will tell you honestly, I believe that the templating on these cards is so bad that it's almost due for an errata, because I cannot imagine. I imagine, and you can tell me what you think, but and I'd like to hear it, but I imagine that a lot of players make this mistake you're about to see me make in this game, and there's no reason for it. It's a terrible feeling. It's a feels bad thing. It's a situation where Magic is not working the way that you just expect Magic to work. Like, why would it work this way? And well, we'll see it in a moment. Obviously, I have an absolute banger of a hand. I am going second. It is risky, of course, against blue, and I could just lose here to a Force of Will, but sometimes you just gotta accept risk, and that's what we're gonna. When your hand's this good, that's what you do. You just accept the risk. So it also means that I'm a little bit slower because I have to lead with City of Traders, but such is life. I want to say, however, that was a mistake. By the way, what I should have done is led with Lotus, because if my opponent forced the Lotus for some reason, like let's say they have a Force of Will that, well, hell, I can't think of one, but should they have decided to force the Lotus, then I would play a basic land and save the City of Traders. So leading here was bad. It assumes the Lotus would be in play, but luckily it is. We're going to get down the big guy. And I decided I'm going to make some tokens here because I didn't want to draw and just discard, and it's unlikely. I mean, this could get bounced, but I can get mana to get it back down in a couple turns if that happens. But I just didn't feel like drawing and discarding here, so possibly wrong, but this will let me, like, this is the kind of opportune moment to do this because over the next few turns I can draw sort of at my own pace, and I've got lots of food to do it now. When I go ahead and play Rog here, I'm happy if my opponent actually invests. Like, what I'd love for my opponent to do is like cast Pyroclasm here and just not develop their board and kill a bunch of 0-drops that basically don't exist anyway. So I do this just to tempt my opponent to waste time, like killing these, or sitting on Lightning Bolt to Lightning Bolt Rog in response or something like that, because that would be a terrible tempo loss for my opponent and a horrible misplay, and, you know, that's what I want to encourage my opponent to do. My opponent gets to tutor out a Soul Ring here right away off an Ancient Tomb, into a Crypt, into a Soul Ring. So this is what, you know, cEDH tends to look like. It looks like just nothing but nonsense. You can see, of course, why Gorilla Shaman is very attractive to me. Winter Orb here, not looking as good, but hey, we've got Confluence. Again, so pleased that that's in there. Let's take a look. Let's draw some cards and see what options we have before deciding how to proceed. All right, so I'm going to float some mana. This is a good time to search while my opponent's kind of tapped out. Go ahead and DT here. And I'm going to get a Soul Ring down, and I can slow their mana down just a little bit here with that orb. It has no effect against me whatsoever. And then follow up by taking out their mana sources. So I decided that's the route I'm going to take here. It looks real good to me. We'll just do this and buy a little bit of time. Possibly. Okay, so they swing in. Of course, we're just going to chump there. And my opponent has, oh my gosh, nasty Frost Titan off of... this is an opponent that I happen to know only from having played a few other games against this opponent. They tend to run a bunch of fast mana and then just bombs, like 6-drops. Like, their deck is just 6-drop, 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 and they just assume that they're going to get their mana. TNC opponent, I think, is, frankly, I mean, that's cool. You like to play Battle Cruiser. I think it's foolish because when the draws don't work out or you get disrupted, like, every time I kill TNC's mana, they end up sitting there just doing nothing for almost the whole game and basically conceding on the spot or losing essentially on the spot. But in this case, hey, it helped them out. They got a nice payout here. They locked the orb down, which means they're going to be able to untap. But it does mean that I'm going to be able to untap too shortly. So before I draw cards, I've got everything I need to do right here. I'm just going to make some blockers to protect Tevesh Szat. And let's go ahead and deal with these. Excellent. So those are gone. I also deal 2 to my opponent there. So things are back to roughly even footing on mana, and I'm in a pretty good spot. I mean, I'm not that far away from taking Nicole Bolas. I mean, it sucks that my Winter Orb's tapped down and I'm chump blocking. It sucks that my opponent has a Battle Cruiser deck with tons of mana, but set those things aside, all in all, I'm doing all right here. So we're going to go ahead and just chump and protect Tevesh. And leave my, my Ancestral Recall in play. I also have, if you notice, I can feed the Swarm this thing and pay the mana and just kill it. The opponent decides not to lock my orb down. They lock my Soul Ring down. It's a little interesting of a decision here. It means that if they spend mana on this turn, they're not going to get it back next turn. So I figured here's where they play their commander, but no, they actually play Future Sight, revealing Consecrated Sphinx. You can see what I mean about Battle Cruiser. 6-drop, 5-drop, 6-drop. You'll see it just progresses that way. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and play the Saga, and from here, my main concern is taking Future Sight off the board because I can just fuel them with tons of 0-drops and mana sources and stuff, and then the Winter Orb does nothing. So let's get that off the board. So I'm going to go ahead and just, yeah, kill that thing. I lose some life. I don't get to see what their next card is, but that's fine. So we know that they've got Consecrated Sphinx and some unknowns. And because they didn't tap my orb, this is really nice. I've got lots of time. There's no Sphinx coming down right now. Very nice. All right, so they swing in. Realizes he's got to tap my orb again, which means, of course, I get my mana back. And, you know, again, going to chump. Okay. So I'm playing this game fine, I think, here. I'm going to go ahead and utilize this to draw some cards. Not quite ready to pull the trigger on taking the commander there yet, but I will. All right, I'm going to play Barbarian Ring. And the reason I do that is because Saga's on 2. And with Saga on 2, if my opponent swings into Tevesh, I can... What I'm hoping he does is attack Tevesh with both. I make a chump block. This thing takes 2 and goes to 10. That way, when it sacrifices itself, it jumps back into play full counters. But I want the option to... cast a Braid here, so I think I choose not to play the Gilded Lotus. Yeah, 2, 3, 4, 5. I could have played the Lotus and then used the Saga, but I felt like it was a little risky because I might want to cast an Abrade. Like I don't know what they're going to play next, and there may be a target for that. So I play another land here, swing in. All right, so this time he's targeting my, once again, locking my Winter Orb down, and does not go after Tevesh. Smart opponent. Goes after my face instead with the trinket. All right, so I'm going to make a chump and chump block the Frost Titan. And of course, my opponent could have tried to tap Saga, but then I would have made a guide and response that wouldn't have done any good for the opponent there. All right, and then for their turn, they spend a bunch of mana and play Atali, another 6-drop, Primal Storm. Okay, got it. All right, so with that in mind, I realized that I am going to, now that I know that they've tapped the Winter Orb, I'm going to go ahead and just kill the Trinket Mage here, and there's no target for this. Just for tempo purposes, I've got an active Barbarian Ring. I could use it, but I need all the mana for the play that I'm going to make next turn, which is going to be the game-winning play. I guarantee it. All right, so I've calculated all my mana exactly, and I know that if I do this exact play, everything's going to work out perfectly. I'm going to go get Crypt while floating a mana, play exactly one land, run out my Lotus, take control of both commanders, make my opponent discard. This time they pitch a Death Cloud, and then I'm going to flip Nicol Bolas, which it'll become this legendary Planeswalker, and then I can nuke Atali and deal 10 to that thing and get it off the board. And then I can, even if they tap one of these things, I can chump block with the other one, and we are all set. Oh no, excuse me, this will be flipped. But so they could attack and kill my Tevesh. But if they attack and kill my Tevesh, I think from there I have a billion mana. I can replay it. I can get Liliana going. I could even potentially grief their hand out and get rid of the Liliana. I'm in such great shape here. So really, I just need to get Atali off the board. So I go ahead and do this, and of course, when you flip a flip card, you know it says exile it, then return it to the battlefield, transformed under your control. So I activate Nicol Bolas for the game-winning play, and it is, in fact, the game-winning play, but not for me, for my opponent, because I lied to you. It doesn't say when you flip the card, put it back into play under your control. It says under its owner's control, and that one templating makes no sense, because what it means is flip cards, unlike every other card in the game, when you activate a card you control, it usually does a thing for you. But when you activate a flip card, it does the thing that you control of your opponents. It does the thing for the opponent. So, you know, I can steal Frost Titan and attack. It would be like if I attacked the Frost Titan and it said its owner taps target. It would be like, hey, whenever Atali attacks, the owner of Atali exiles the top cards. For whatever reason, flip cards say flip transformed under its owner's control rather than your control. And for that reason right there, I mean, it's possible I could have got, let's be real, I'm not getting back in this game. This game's over. And I immediately concede and I lose. So it was the game-winning play, but not for me. It was the game-winning play for my opponent. I worked all that time and put that investment into this game only to have it lose because I can't RTFC, right? Read the fucking card. But more importantly than that, I honestly think this is just nuts. And the reason I think this is nuts is I think the templating, in my view, if I worked at Wizards, I would absolutely push as hard as I could to make a rule that overrode the templating and in hindsight, and then just reprint these cards with the correct wording and literally print them saying, all of them that flip and say under your control, not owner's control, because this is absolutely, in my view, it's kind of outrageous. It's outrageously stupid. And I'll tell you why. It is simple to follow the instructions on a card, in theory, right? I mean, you read the card, you follow the instructions on the card. And to use an analogy to make clear what I'm about to explain is, and you might not agree with me, but I do want to just at least make my point clear. If it is simple to know which card is the the accelerator, and which card is the decelerator, aka the brake, in a car, right? So one pedal makes you go, and one pedal makes you stop. And knowing how to push the one that makes you go when you want to go, and how to push one that makes you want to stop when you want to stop, is simple and basically brainless. And frankly, reading a card is simple, and doing what the card says is basically brainless. But the trick is, the human mind does not operate that way. We have two kinds of brains in our head, right? Our brain works on two levels. It works on a automatic system and a processing system. The automatic system automates as many tasks as possible and will always seek to automate tasks from the processing system. The processing system is the one that when you look at something, you have to stop and take your time and think it through and then process it, and then you can move forward. That's the thing that you engage when you look at a card. And that's why when you look at a new card, rather, when you look at a new card, you have to, you stop and you look and you think, and it takes some time and you have to work it through. That is a slow process that we almost never use as much as possible because the automatic system wants to take over whenever it can. The automatic system is the one that allows you to respond on instinct. So when I see this land, I don't even know, like if you saw earlier, I just clicked on this and went, oh, okay. I have no idea what that freaking thing does. What I saw was tap for add red and the word channel. Didn't need to read the rest of it because I know what channel does. Channel is a card it's an effect from play, and so, from hand. And because it says channel, I know that I can disregard all of this, and the only thing I need to know about this card is that it taps for red, and it's a legendary land, in case that comes up. So this is the only thing I need to know about the card. So when I looked at it earlier, I went, automatic process kicked in, channel, disregard, tap for red, got it. Now I know what I need to know. I didn't take the time to sit and process it. I didn't look at it. Why? Because the automatic process is important, and the clock is important, and there's a lot of reasons why, but that's just how the human brain operates. To put things at odds so that you have to do the other thing, so that you cannot just look at a card and just assume, like if I looked at this, if channel and then right under here it said you may play this ability from play, I would be so angry at a card created that way, because it would constantly be usurping expectations and screwing with the automatic process, and it would force me to have to stop and look at every card with channel. And I don't want to. I don't want to have to sit and read every card that my opponent plays, because that basically makes playing Magic impossible. The amount of time that it would take to be like, hold on, let me read Steam Vents, make sure nothing changed. Hold on, let me read Ancient Tomb. Okay, yeah. Hold on, let me read. Like, you can't play Magic that way. You have to be able to automate things. And usually Magic's really good at allowing you to do that by templating cards so they work the way that you expect them to work. So that essentially whatever, for example, Mana Crypt doesn't turn off when it's tapped, although it did in the past. And that interaction in the past was completely contradictory to the way you thought things would work. In the past, cards that were there was an artifact type called continuous artifacts that shut off by the rules when they were tapped. Those cards, like Winter Orb, now say on them as long as this is untapped, because they retain the functionality of the old method, but they no longer say continuous artifact. Why? Because continuous artifacts didn't work the way that players thought that they should work. Continuous artifacts turned off when tapped, but they didn't say it anywhere on the card. They just said the word continuous, and you were just supposed to know that. Well, players didn't just know that. The automatic process took over. And so they would just see an artifact that didn't say anything about turning off when it was tapped, and then they would get confused or caught off guard, or even knowing the rules would forget that the card turned off when it was tapped. Same thing happening here with cards like this. They need to template these and go back and say these cards that exile for all these cards, every single flip card, it needs to say return under your control, not owner's control, not his owner's control, which is, it should say under your control. That's all it needs to say. And that would fix every single flip card. They would all work the way you think. And I wanted to use that analogy, I want to get back to the analogy of the car. If your opponent, it would be an opponent. If, Tesla decided that, hey, we're just going to switch the accelerator and the decelerator. We're just going to put the brake where the accelerator goes in other cars, and the accelerator where the brake goes in our Teslas. You could drive that car no problem. But what would happen when you're under pressure? When there's a lot going on. You're in the middle of a game. You're in the middle of a situation on the road, right? You're driving it backwards, no problem, except, it's a little chaotic, and oh crap, I need to stop because, the guy in front of you just like slammed into the back of the car in front of him, and you're like, oh no, I need to stop. And you would slam on exactly the place where you assume the brake would be because of years of practice, because the automatic system would take over, and then you would probably get yourself killed. And that's exactly what I did in a game of Magic. I was tracking coin flips, I was tracking tapped winner orbs, I'm tracking Tevesh Szat counters, I'm tracking how much mana I need to play a Lotus, and does it give me enough to flip this, and if I flip this, then can I use the ability, and what will Atali flip, and what will Frost Titan tap, and how much life does my opponent have, how many cards are they holding, how much life can I afford to take here with my Barbarian Ring, and my Mana Crypt running, should I grief my opponent, and I'm trying to keep track of all this in my head, and the last thing I need is for someone to switch the accelerator and the brake on my car, and just tell me that a card that I control, if I activate its ultimate ability, is gonna benefit my opponent? What? That makes no sense. So that is a rant. I apologize if you don't like rants. I am glad if you do. But either way, that is my rant. I think it's complete nonsense, and I would heavily advocate for that to be changed. I think this makes no sense, and it's easily fixed. There's so many ways you could fix it. But the simplest way is just make a rule by de facto. Flip cards, when they flip to their other side, they come into play under their controller's control, not the owner's control. Makes no sense. Literally makes no sense to me. Why they're so extra powerful? Like why does this card need to be even better, right? So that you can't even control Magic the card. It just makes no sense. And I can't even tell you how many times I've had games to my benefit where I have like Baby Jace, the 2 mana, the little tiny. It has the flip. When you tap it and mill, and my opponent will Veto Shackles my Jace and then activate it and give me a Jace and then lose the game and then just like concede because they're like shame and frustration and anger at what they just did. And I've gone like, oh my God, man, just ruined a good game that I was just having. And sometimes I laugh and think, oh my gosh, that's so ridiculous. Thank goodness they did that. I was in trouble. But at the same time, I'm like, God, it feels slimy to win that way because the card shouldn't work that way. It makes no sense that the benefit is me, not them. And having had that happen, I've done that in the past. I've had it happen to me in the past, and have had it happen again. And no matter how many times it happens to me, I just can't beat the fact that when I'm on automatic processing mode, when my brain is overloaded with things to keep track of, I'm not sitting here thinking, well, what if one of these cards works backwards? Like, what if the rules are set up so that it should work backwards according to the way that, like, why would, imagine any other card. Imagine Necropotent said, like, imagine if I Praetor's Grasp my opponent's Necro, and I put it into play, and then I'm like, yes, Necro, and I pay like 15 life, and then my opponent puts 15 cards into their hand. You'd be like, what? Did I just kill myself? Right? Like, it literally makes no sense. I control the card, I'm doing the thing, I should get the benefits. Frustrating. But, hey, that's the end of my rant. Hopefully you agree. I will run through some games, some real games now. I call them real games because games that are actually played correctly. Again, this is the list. We'll run through those, and I'll get off my soapbox right now. I do think that I deserve to lose that game. I did an RTFC, and well done TNC. Despite my critique of your deck building, you played well and you got the victory, and that's great. But so it's really nothing against my opponent at all. I don't think they should have like conceded in response or something to, oh, just give it to me, nothing like that. That is my own bad. I'm not saying that, and I'm fine to have that one as a loss in the record books and even put it out here and publicly, but I do think that it indicates a problem. Basically, you want to remove things where if your opponent makes actions, if your opponent reads a card and takes actions according to the way that basically anyone would expect the card to work, you should not set things up so they work differently. Again, you should not reverse the accelerator and the brake in a car. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. And then demand that, well, we told you which one was which, right? Like, it would just be completely irresponsible and insane. And I feel like Magic should also be fixed anytime something is like that. And believe it or not, I'm operating on principle that Wizards of the Coast has explicitly stated. Mark Rosewater's written about this. He has said that there have been changes made to cards and to rules because things were not working the way that you would expect them to work, and things should work the way that they're expected to work, unless you just have a bad understanding of the game, right? Like if I don't understand how mana works or something like that, that's a different story. But if I think I understand how this game works, right? But a card just doesn't work the way that it, should, that's something that should be fixed. Incidentally, if you want another example of something that I think ought to be fixed when it comes to templating, it is gifts ungiven, factor fiction, Liliana the Veil. Anything that says split into two piles and your opponent makes a choice, the templating on all of them should be, if it has to be done retroactively, then do it. All of them should read the same. It should say, pick the pile either that you want to keep or throw away, I don't care. And then all of them should be worded the exact same way. But actually, if I cast Factor Fiction and then I ultimate Liliana, I can't tell you how many times my opponent picks the pile that they want to keep versus, or sorry, they pick the pile backwards, because Factor Fiction says pick the pile you want your opponent to keep, and Liliana says pick the pile you want to sacrifice. It's so annoying. But anyway, that is a second thing that I would change if I were able to get a job working for my company, a company doing something, you know, I don't know, making a game that I love better. But all I can do right now is talk to YouTube. All right, let's look through some games now. I got this game against Dapper Dan. I don't know how good these games are going to be. That was the main one that I wanted to focus on. But I thought you might like to see a few extras here before we finish up. Here I'm playing against Arcanus, the Omnipotent. And, you know, I've got a great hand here. You get to see Pentad Prism in action. Should we choose to utilize it? Well, it will depend on how this plays out. And, of course, having the Mox Monkey there, very happy to see that card. I'm going to go ahead and just sneak out Rog. There's a lot of blue counters that counter things that cost 0, counter things if played from the, you know, command zone and stuff like that. So I'll just go ahead and get it down. Opponent plays an Opal. Mox Monkey's just drooling over there with hunger. But, of course, right now there are only a small handful of counters my opponent can play that can stop my commander. So when you have a window like that, take it. So I'm going to go for it. And, yeah, it sticks. All right. Same thing. I'm going to make tokens first, and then we'll do the stuff afterwards. All right. Tower there, not too bad for me, indicating that they don't have double blue. I mean, for starters, they might have a negate effect or something. They could have a mana leak as well. Oh, but look at that! I drew a deflecting SWAT, even better. So go ahead and get the Saga down. Thinking about how I want to do this, you know, I might deploy the Shaman here. I might play the Prism. I might do nothing, or my opponent might concede, and that's exactly what happened. I didn't get to finish. So we never really got to see, you know, the fun of the extra cards that have been added, because at this point, my opponent knows it's over. He's a blue deck. He can't contain me. He's behind in mana. He's behind in cards. It's just, yeah, it's just game over. All right, so next game is against El Jefe Lynch. And I happen to know El Jefe means the chief. It's a, well, at work, I'm the chief, so it was a kind of a running joke at work with a couple of my friends. That my nickname was El Jefe, so I kind of get a laugh out of that. So Chief Lynch over here, playing Maelstrom Wanderer against my my Rog deck, and you can see here we've got a smokestack draw, not a fast one or anything, but you know it's still, well, I'll let you judge for yourself. I'll go ahead and get the map out, get the Rog out. Again, if my opponent wants to bolt this, more power to them. It's not a real card from my side, and you know. All this really does is it prevents, the other reason for this, especially against red, is if they go land, Mox, not Rograkh, but Ragavan, attack you with dash, this guy really wants to be in play to chump, right? All right, so Mana Vault there is a little scary. Not super pleased with where things are going here, but rather than brutality, I want to go get some more mana next turn, so I'm just gonna sit here. Opponent plays Vegetation. I'm like, God, maybe I should have Brutality. Sucks that I don't have the mana to get the Opposition Agent out. But I do get to map here and grab a Ancient Tomb. Alright, so for my turn, I'm going to go ahead and just play the stack and pass. We're both on 4 mana. Opponent does have a free thing that they can sacrifice. Of course, they're sacking 0 permanents this turn. And they strip mine 2 of my mana. This is suddenly quite painful. I'm hurting now. Can they kill the stack? No, but they can control Magic Rog, which is a really interesting play, and they recognize that Rog is stack fuel. That's actually awesome of them, because now they can sacrifice the Rog to Smokestack and buy themselves a lot of time. So again, you want to put the adding of the soot counters on the bottom. It's the exact opposite order that it pops up on Magic Online. So you got to click this one first to put that on the bottom. Okay, and then the sacrifice effect on the top, so that you sacrifice the least number of counters. We're going to sack 0 counters. We have 0 soot, and then the soot counter will resolve, and we'll add a soot counter to it, and draw for the turn. Lovely, lovely draw there. Amazing draw. it allows me to do this. So I'm going to Brutality, kill the Rog, try to get into their hand with both modes of Collective Brutality. This will take something out that they can sack, so they're probably going to eat their Mana Vault here. But it'll give me information about their hand and allow me to figure out what to do next. And I'm probably not going to do Toxic Deluge. And I see this. Sackland, Greater Good, Harmonize, beautiful. I'm going to take Harmonize, and they've got 2 Sacklands. I could leave this in the graveyard for Yogg-Will, but I'm not going to because I'm not playing Will this turn, and if I'm not, then I might like to just play it for free next turn, eat it with the Smokestack, and then will it back into play. So anyway, so for now, all right. Okay, so my opponent, for whatever reason, decides to eat their island instead of their tap vault. I'm not quite sure why they did that. I mean, if I'm them, unless you're planning to do something with Greater Good, and I don't see what I would do is during my upkeep, I would tap my lands, untap the vault, and then sack my island and play it that way. But anyway, instead they play it this way, and, well, I get to sack in response, flash out the opposition agent, and from there my opponent concedes. They're going to lose. They lose a land here, basically, and then I'm going to actually, during my upkeep, I'm going to Smokestack, and I'm going to go ahead and eat a land. I'm going to play the land that I get from them, right? So I'm going to eat a land. I'm going to add this to 2, play the land that came from them, play my commander, put 2 guys out who will then, from then on, Smokestack sits on 2, and they got to sack 2 permanents a turn for the rest of the game. I'm never going to let go of the sack. I'm just going to keep plussing my commander. Even when they have no permanents, I'm just going to leave it there. So there's no hope for them to ever come back in this game. And my opponent concedes there. All right, next was against Moonkey. At least you get to see some of the new cards in action, which is cool. Another pretty sick draw here, playing against Gadwick the Wizard. All right. So anyway, it does. It's like a living. It's a living stroke of genius, basically, and has another ability to tap things, which I'm not sure how relevant that is, but it's something. It could be a problem if I had like a Mana Vault here. Anyway, I'm going to lead off with Duress, and my opponent has Consider in response, so like a mini Opt almost. And then, okay, so this is the hand. Wow, I have Gorilla Shaman in my hand. I didn't get a red source because I wanted to first turn Duress, but man, if I get a red source, look at all this yummy food. The thing is, I don't really want my opponent I don't want my opponent playing land and just sitting on Arcane Denial and then suddenly I can't get my commander out next turn. So despite the fact that I normally don't mind an Arcane Denial too much, Denial is going to be the card that I'm going to take here. I'm going to leave the rest of that in their hand. So we'll leave this up. And I'm going to go ahead and play Lotus right now before they can counter. Same thing with Rog, and pass for the turn. All right. And I'm hoping, that maybe they'll like rapid hybridize this thing or whatever, but of course they're not going to do that. His opponent's not terrible. So they're going to ponder here. And then they find themselves an island with it and a Mana Crypt. Crazy. So they drew for the turn, finding an island and a crypt. So this is the last of what's in their hand. This allows them to, if they want to, and they do, play the Isochron and imprint rapid hybridization, turning things into frogs. So we know the last 2 cards in their hand is yummy, yummy Gorilla Shaman food. And they can make a 3/3. So we have to make sure that the Shaman comes down and eats like Mana Crypt, Mox, or just eats this and this, or however we do it. But we want to do it because it's going to become a 3/3 shortly after he deploys. So that is one thing to keep in mind. So I could Duress here, Thoughtseize, but obviously that is not correct. We're going to go ahead and get the commander down. This is one of those situations where I want cards now, and I'm willing to overdraw to find them because I do have Crucible here. So if I overdraw and throw away a land, like say I drew like 2 lands, I could throw 1 away and then Crucible down the road and get it back. This is fine though. My hand is good. I actually have a card drawing engine in play, and I think I'm pretty safe here. I'd like to keep the Crucible, so I decided I'm going to throw away the Clamp. It's easy to will back later, and I've got card drawing aplenty with Tevesh. I'm already choked on cards, in fact. I'm discarding the hand size, right? I don't think I need the Clamp right now, and plus I don't have the mana to really use it. I've got things I want to do. I want to Thoughtseize them. I want to Gorilla Shaman them, so I want to Biforce them. So I'll get around to that later. Opponent gets a land out and then just plays their commander. So we know what 2 of their cards are, and they're going to draw 2 more. So they've got 4 cards in hand. Nice draw, more removal. Little bit much at this point. But hey, I can thought seize them, and then we will. Here I'm gonna take a risk. I'm gonna leave them with High Tide. It's quite scary to give them that much mana, but they're actually pretty flooded on mana. So I really want to take Chain of Vapor, which can bounce Tevesh, Szat. I guess they really value High Tide. They could have played Chrome Mox and bounced it right away. Anyway, we're gonna take we're gonna take Chain and hope that they don't High Tide like combo kill me, with a Time Spiral here or whatever. And because of that, and me being concerned about what they could be doing here, I'm gonna go ahead and just kill the Scepter because I'd like to get the Shaman in play ASAP. I want to get into play next turn, and I want to eat their Crypt and just like really hurt their mana and potentially eat these other things as well, depending on if they play them. So I'm gonna go ahead and just kill that now. And I do that over using I use this over this simply because this is, basically I'm maximizing my mana utility. This is a two casting cost spell, this is a one casting cost spell, so let's do it that way. Alright. So my opponent's turn, they draw, and I guess they brick and they concede. And I'm fine with that. So next turn, I would have drawn 2. Hopefully I hit a land, and then, like I said, we're just gonna, ideally I hit a land here, like, because I chump block and then draw and then probably draw 2. And if I hit like a swamp or a mountain, red or black producing land, then what I would do is hymn them, play the Gorilla Shaman, and then eat their Crypt. It'd be kind of the way to go. Or hymn them, Shattering Spree, the Crypt, hide the Gorilla Shaman to entice them to play more artifact mana. Both of them are pretty good. Most of the time I would play the Shaman though, and the reason is that they might Time Spiral or Time Twister. That's one of the ways that they can rebuild. And if they do that, I'd like to have the Shaman in play ready to, they might Time Spiral into a bunch of artifacts, but I want them sitting there making that a hard decision for them and not an easy one. All right. Anyway, we move on to Guy Fieri Ball. Plus, they might overvalue the ability to do something about the Shaman, not realizing I have more artifact removal in my hand. I'm playing against Guy Fieri Ball running Sithis, Harvest Hand, who's going to draw a card whenever they play an enchantment. And leads off with Root Maze, and my insane start is suddenly incredibly slow. But Root Maze, I love. It's a tech card that I picked up a while back because I was thinking that it would be incredible in formats dominated by fetch lands. And however, because what happens is they put the fetch land into play tapped, and then they fetch with it and put the resulting land into play tapped, and it sets your opponent way, way back if they're running fetch lands and you're not. But Guy Fieri Ball here, for some reason, is running fetch lands with it, you'll see. And this actually means, look at that, Prismatic Vista. Or Vista. So they do get to claim my Amber here, but this land is not going to produce any mana this turn, nor will it produce mana next turn. Of course, I'm in the same boat here with this thing, but the fact that my opponent's set back like that is quite beneficial to me. Alright, so I'm going to play a tapped Mire and a tapped Springleaf Drum, and I'm going to pass for the turn. Alright, so my opponent fetches a tapped Plains, and look at that. Just not good to put fetch lands in your Root Maze deck, I don't think. Anyway, from here, I'll go ahead and play Rog, and I'm going to fetch, put a tapped. I might as well get the Blood Crypt because it comes into play tapped anyway. You can pay the life here, and it'll still come into play tapped by the rules of Root Maze, so don't make that mistake. But what I can do here is play a Rag and Vampiric Tutor. So I'm going to tutor, and the reason I play Rag here is because now, of course, if my opponent plays a blocker, it's going to come into play. It's going to come into play untapped. But I have the mana to kill it like with the Ready and get through with Rag and put tapped treasures into play. And Ragavan to Ready is a lovely combo where you hit them, make a treasure, they play a blocker, you sack the treasure, kill their blocker, hit them, make a treasure, play a blocker, so that kind of thing. And that's exactly what we're planning to do here. So the card I tutored for was Jessica's Will. I guess I could have let you think on that one for a bit, but Jessica's Will is a way for me to get fast mana that doesn't require me to it doesn't require me to wait on Root Maze because it's a ritual effect, right? So this, and I figured if I get Will, there's always a chance I could hit other things that might benefit me as well. So what I'm going to do first is attack with Rag. So even though, yes, my opponent can block here, this is our commander. I mean, this is our card drawing engine. They're a long ways off from replaying it, and this is not my commander. This is just a one-drop that I invested in. So for them, this doesn't really look like an enticing block, so I'm going to swing in. But for me, of course, we know that I very much want the token. And look what I removed. Kataki's War Wage. Oh, that would have been so bad for me if that had come into play. Anyway, happy to see that go. Alright, so now with my mana, I'm going to go ahead and just play the ready and immediately just kill their commander before they can get card drawing going and sack the treasure to do it. And I'm going to sit on the will. And the reason I'm sitting on the will is, again, I've got some time. Root Maze is slowing things down to a very good degree. And I will get around to Jessica's will in a moment. But getting their card drawing engine off the board, really important here, I think. Alright, so opponent's thinking, finally plays Sylvan, and I'm like, yeah, that's great. It makes that Jessica's Will tutor just look even more brilliant, right? I could play Shatterskull here, and I think I missed the fact that I could play it here. I'm not sure where I was at. But of course I wanted Jessica's first, and before I do that, I want to attack with Ragavan first. So let's get that out of the way. And we'll hit, and this time, Finhorn Elves, which is great, because I have Springleaf Drum in play. So we'll tap my 0-1. Play a Mana Source. This is excellent for me. And then I'm going to play another Mana Source that's going to come into play tapped. Make a Defender, and I should play Shatterskull Smashing here, but I don't. It's going to work out for me. I was thinking I'd hold it because it's a nice, it works nice with Jessica's Will if I need to kill some things. But so far I haven't really needed to, and hitting land drops might be more important, but I've already got the ready to kill things, so. And I wait on the will. The other reason to wait on the will is that because with the Sylvan Library, the best thing my opponent can do here is like draw all of the cards and then play them really slowly, so I'll get an even bigger Jessica's. So it's a little greedy, but I think it's probably right, and I didn't have like a compelling need to run it out. But as it turns out, opponent gets to play Land, Esper, Arbor, so they actually have the same number of cards in hand. And the Shatterskull in my hand looks like I was brilliant for holding it rather than playing it there. So we'll call it brilliance, I guess. Alright, this turn's such a blowout. So thanks to the Finhorn Elf I got from my opponent, I get to kill, Jessica's Will, pay for the mana, revealing, look at this, Mox Coalition Calling, oh my gosh, this is just gross. And my opponent just concedes before the rest of the blowout turn. So what's going to happen here is I'm going to Shatterskull Smashing, killing the Esper Sentinel and the Arbor Elf, which would take 4 mana, leaving me with 1 extra. I'm going to use the Liquid Metal Torque to make the Sylvan Library into an artifact. I'm going to use the ready to kill the Sylvan Library from there. I'm going to play the Mox Diamond and put the Mox Diamond into play, discarding the Swamp. It'll come into play tapped. And then with the last, I believe I would have 1 mana left, and I would have sacked the Defender to kill the Library. And then I would sack the Treasure and Diabolic Intent, sacrificing Rog to go get whatever I want at that point. Or sack, actually even better, I would sack the token and calling the weak Rog, and have, I would have had 1 mana floating, and suddenly I would have 5 mana floating. And from there, figure out what to do. I could Diabolic Intent, I could Karn, whatever. Anyway, it was a blowout turn. My opponent conceded before I could finish it, and I don't blame him. All right, Air 56. And playing Atraxon, I've got an insanely slow hand, but it has a little acceleration, a little disruption. I'm going first. I decided, you know what? I'm going to keep it. It's okay. It's pretty weak. Sometimes it's better to Air 56 on the side of caution, Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and search for a Blood Crypt right here. And I could wasteland my opponent. This land, I was thinking it was a full-on depletion land, but it's slightly better than that. It doesn't actually sacrifice itself when it has no counters. It just stops giving you mana of any color. My opponent plays Thrumming Bird, so I don't really know why they have that in their deck, but I don't really want to find out. I could Shatterskull Smashing, but I'm thinking I'll just K-Command and take a card out of their hand right now. And make them think a little bit about what they're going to do next. Encourage them to tap some mana so that I can sneakily play the City of Traders and get my commander down before, they're thinking they might not have time where they don't have to hold a counter spell up. Now, Reflecting Pool and Marsh is really cool because now the pool taps for mana of any color. That's good for my opponent. And they play this thing, Phyrexian Crusader. First strike, pro red and white, Infect. So they're clearly trying to win with Infect. Now I see what they're doing. Shoot, pro red, you say. Well, luckily I can make some black. tokens to block with. So we'll go ahead and do that. And pass for the turn. And as long as they don't clear the tokens out, like as long as they don't kill the tokens, I should be fine, I think. But as it turns out, so my opponent has this thing. Champion of Lambholt. And creatures with power less than it cannot block creatures that my opponent controls. Well, 0/1 is less than 1/1. And so I cannot actually block the 2/2. So my opponent could go after Tevesh, but they go face so they can get their infect or poison mechanic rolling, and 8 tokens away from death. That could be very, very fast. All right, for my turn, I'm going to Imperial Seal. I'm going to let you think about what you might like to get in this situation, but we will proceed. And then I can Tevesh the card into my hand, so we'll go ahead and do that. And I'm going to get maximum cards here. I want maximum choices. So I went ahead and got a Death Cloud. And I was thinking, you know, I'd play a land and Cloud for 2 here, but I drew the Diabolic Intent, and that kind of changes things for me a little. It allows me to wait just a bit longer on the Cloud, I think. Squeeze a little more value out of it. It does come with some risk. But a Cloud that doesn't actually kill all their lands is, I prefer to, you know, get them all. So with that in mind, I'm going to Shatterskull smashing away this champion, and now my token can chump, and so I'm not necessarily dead here to like a Giant Growth Berserk effect would still kill me, but you know, there's, you know, you can't stop everything, right? And opponent plays Yawgmoth Thran, Physician. This is a card that was suggested to me, actually. It's a really interesting one. Pay a life, sacrifice a creature, put a -1/-1 counter on a creature, and draw a card. But it sacrifices another creature, so they can't sack Yawg to shrink this and draw. And so that's actually a card that it really could work in this deck, and it's super interesting. But in the meantime, I just don't know if we need the card in the deck. So anyway, we're going to chump block here, though. And of course, this is just Death Cloud ready to rock and roll. I could, well, let's see, 3 and then 1, 2, 3, 4. I could Cloud for 4 here. But with the drawing a Winter Orb, I can actually wait even more, one more turn. And so I will wait just one more turn on the Cloud. So I play Winter Orb here, I play Wasteland, I make some blockers, and pass. And then my opponent runs into the trap, they untap a non-basic, so I'm going to go ahead and just waste that right away. And for their turn, you know, they could swing in or whatever, but it's not going to do any good. All right, I'm going to go into Tevesh and grab a few more cards in hand. And now, even because they missed a land drop here, I don't have to Cloud for as much, which means I get to keep a card in my hand. So let's go ahead and blow the Death Cloud on 4. And I'll go ahead and dump everything except for Blackleaf Cliffs. And then I sack down 1, 2, 3, 4, and then play Blackleaf Cliffs and call it good. And then from there I just get to ultimate Tevesh, grabbing their Atraxa. Atraxa starts ticking Tevesh back up for me as fast as possible. I draw extra cards. I mean, the game's super over. Obviously, opponent has nothing at that point, so yeah, they can see. And that's it. That's it for the deck. You didn't get to see God Pharaohs in action, perhaps another time. But you got the deck list changes, you got my rant, and you got and watching me lose, and you got to watch me win. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, and I don't usually go off like that. If you're new to the channel, that's not my usual mode. But in this particular case, I just found the whole thing to be a little bit mind-bogglingly confusing. Just kidding, mind-bogglingly confusing as to why they would template a card so well, so as to essentially create these feels bad moments for the player, right? Just feels bad. Anyway, but that's all I've gotten for now. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.